But
Welcome back, everyone. OpenLine. We are talking about basically career advice. Nashville is booming. Unemployment is low. But what if you're out there now looking for a job? What are some of the things you can expect to encounter, and how can you make your job search go better? Happy to have with us Matt Lowney. He gives career advice, and we appreciate that.
Right.
Where you can. All right, we have a couple calls. Let's go to Tom. Hello, Tom. Tom, are you there?
Yes, Mr. Lowry. How you doing, sir?
Good.
I'm having trouble getting employment. I'm in the restaurant business, and while many people are hiring, I'm always forced to answer certain questions on the application that seems to disqualify me. Now, my mama didn't raise no liars, so I have to be honest. I did shank a man.
I hate to hear that.
Well, that's not good.
That's not good.
So
let's speak to a broader answer there, which is, I don't know what to do with that. So I think a broader answer there is right, like criminal records. And it's funny, actually, in a very bad way. Right. It's funny. It actually is a decent topic because it's particularly under the last administration, right? They did start talking about relevance of what's in a background check. So there's, you're seeing less and less employers, for instance, doing credit checks. Like, how is that relevant to a job as an anchor, right? Your credit has nothing to do with it. And the idea that somehow it's a connectivity to your status as a upstanding citizen there's no connectivity. And so more and more companies are getting away from that now. Financial services companies, I can kind of get there. Same answer for criminal background. I mean, even some states have made it illegal, like you've paid your debt to society. Why should you continue to be punished? And by the way, that hurts society from a governmental cost standpoint, right? If my friend Tom can't get a job, guess where he's going to be working, right? Nowhere, and be getting, government subsidies. So
that was something like ban the box, I believe, where they would ban whether you can even ask that question or something to that effect. I think that was here in Davidson County.
And another movement in like New York and California, not surprisingly, like you can't ask about their salaries, your previous salary. As opposed to say this job pays 70, but if you made 50 and you're having to make 55, historically, be like, hey, Ben will hire you for 55. But if the job pays 65 to 70, that's what you should make. So what they've done is, because what happens, it has a disparate impact on minorities and females. That's why you wind up with females making less than a job.
Oh, that's interesting.
So they said, let's do it. So I think it maybe a little interestingly points to a path of what employers are beginning to not be able to do versus just on their own kind of going, I'm not sure that we need this information. Like a drug screen is fine. I'm totally cool with a drug screen. I think that makes a lot of sense. Maybe not in Colorado, but otherwise I think it makes a lot of sense. But you get kind of credit and then criminal background and relevance to the job. And you might also be surprised at how liberal they are in terms of looking at your background. If you've had like a DUI, frankly, I've hired many a folk with a DUI. That's not as much of a issue as you may think, as a disqualifier as you might remember, as you might think. And you do, I mean, it's amazing how many, it sounds sad, how many people have a criminal record, and again, you get into disparate impact. That's a societal thing, but if they pay their debt. What are some things
that might disqualify you, that might surprise you? So again, you've been out there in these conversations. I'm interested in what are you looking at beyond just the interview? Let's say, people interview well, but what are some of the things that might bring them down?
I think the two things that get me are people who don't tell their references they're going to be a reference. Like 90% of reference, you're just kind of like, hey, they're a great guy, I'd hire them to do anything, they're perfect. But occasionally you'll get in these conversations and you can clearly tell that they did not know, and they'll open up and just tell you all kinds of nonsense, and I have seen many people lose that. I think what people...
that's interesting, not telling your reference.
Prepare your references appropriately would be the lesson learned. Don't let that be a risky flight on you. Now, I will say the things you can't control that do absolutely happen are kind of what I have termed back channel references. So like I know maybe you worked at a news station in St. Louis, and I happen to have worked there years ago, or my brother-in-law's sister-in-law's cousin is the head of the station. You may not give me the reference, but guess who you call, right? Say, hey, what do you talk? What do you think about this guy Ben? What was the quality of work, and how was it with coworkers? That can be really revealing.
Right.
That absolutely happens. And Nashville, as big as it's getting, is still a very small place. And if you've been doing what you've been doing for any amount of time, between your bosses leaving and coworkers leaving and going places, it's not hard to do. I mean, I would say as an employment practice, it's a gray area. I wouldn't chase, but nothing really weird comes out, right? Like Now, there's nothing, don't do any self-inflicted stupid.
Right.
You don't need to put your political affiliation or anything that would connect to that. Like, hey, I'm a member of the Young Republicans in Williamson County. You might think that's great. I don't think it's highly relevant.
Right.
Church stuff. I think I used to see a lot of that 20 years ago. Hey, elder at my church. I get what they're going for, leadership and community involvement. I don't know if that's appropriate in a lot of environments. Like, hey, that makes you think, are they going to come in here and preach to all the coworkers?
Oh,
and
no.
do I want
that's
that?
Too bad. I hate to hear that. But
let's be honest. If you've been around HR enough, you've also seen the downside of that. Like, you have had employees come in and try to preach and make people uncomfortable, and you're like, oh, now I got to have a conversation with this guy. So it isn't without a little bit of
very
past lessons learned. So
what about social media? Would you go and look at someone's Facebook page or not?
Every recruiter does.
Every recruiter does.
And if they don't, the hiring manager will. I would say, if you haven't tidied that up, that's your own fault. Like, that's just stupid. Like, really, if you haven't, you can put your limitations on Facebook. You can put it on security settings where only my friends can see my pictures. Well, do that. I mean, there's no reason not to do it. Even if you think it's kind of funny and you paste some meme, I've seen some really dumb things that you wouldn't think that smart people put as a meme that they reshared or whatever. So, especially at the moment in job search, but I kind of like to keep my world mine in general. I think most should. So you don't need to be so cavalier, and if you are, just put it, like I said, you can put security locks down that you can see just profile pictures and just make that one reasonable. Like, I still see
because people are going to look at that. Everybody.
Some companies have it as part of their policy, like their background check. I've not worked for any of them where they check, social media, but I've certainly heard of companies who put that as part of their, background check, and they look at it, and it's purely subjective, right? So, are you drunk at a football game with your buddies, and
there's a video.
Is that okay? I mean, I don't actually have a problem with that, but it's just, why open yourself up to that? I mean, you control it to the nth degree. Just don't do self-inflicted dumb. Don't just cut. No one needs to see that, and you can prevent them from seeing it. So there's no reason to do that.
Let's go to Bill. Hello, Bill. Bill.
Yes, am I on there?
Yeah, you're on the air. What's on your mind?
Sorry, I got a question about what that paper that I do, a resume about looking for a job. Now, if I've been working vending jobs, primarily concessions, in the concession business for a guy, and I get paid under the table. Am I going to get him in trouble if I put that, like, if I've never had like a real job, do I get in trouble for putting that on there?
Well, there's two issues there, right? I mean, I'm not a tax attorney. That might be another matter.
I would say, you shouldn't.
But in terms of just, hey, if there's a job on your resume, then you've got some application to you. I mean, if it's relevant, put it on there from a skill set standpoint, right? I think that's fine. I'm not going to speak to the cash payment side. I mean, maybe that's okay to get some money with that, some money otherwise.
All right, coming out of college now, millennials have this sort of, stigma.
Yeah.
How difficult is it? You even said, I think earlier, boss looks at them the wrong way. They may be more inclined to go. I don't know if some of that is just a stereotype or if it's true. What are we seeing with what's coming out of college now?
So, and I think there's a new generation after millennials now. Boy, if it's like Generation Z or whatever it is now, but the millennials are now out, right? And there's a next generation, they're graduating now. I don't know much about that group. But they kind of characterize younger jobs that people in the job market. I think there's a couple of, yes, there is a sense, and it's very valid that they do not stick. So as I interview somebody for a job that only requires 2 or 3 years experience, I need to hear a couple things. One, what's the career narrative? How does this decision make sense to the next decision? So you're kind of looking at a 5-10 year window, and so make sure they actually think of the world that way. If they're kind of thinking like, hey, I'm just worried about the next paycheck, that's not, and you get that answer quite a bit, right? So they don't think about the career narrative. Here's where I was, here's where I want to be, and here's how this went squarely in the middle and makes sense. So I think part of it is they've got to think through questions in the interview. There's a lot more to the questions that are being asked. And also knowing going into the interview that that's a little bit of an assumption. Maybe you address it. Say, hey, I know probably one of your concerns might be that kind of every 6 to 8 months, me and my kind kind of look for new jobs, and that's not really what I'm about. I think I really want to find a place, and culturally this place aligns, and I see where I need to grow in the job I need now, but it prepares me for the next job. Like, you don't give me like, hey, I want to be in your seat in 5 years. That's nonsense. But I think reasonably there's a little growth now, and there's a lot of growth over the next 3 to 5 years. I want to come in, and the other thing is, and this is what drives me nuts personally, is they kind of talk about in terms of what you can give me as an employer versus that's not the part of this exercise. Like, you're here to do work. I'm just not an extension of college, right? So don't make the whole thing about what the employer can do for them. And there's a lot who think of it and talk that way, whether intentionally or not.
Okay.
So,
and maybe they've been taught to ask questions. And that's part of it.
Yeah.
But that shouldn't be the vibe
right, like it's okay to be developed. I want to be here to be developed, but I also want to be here to contribute. I think that's the and contribute part. Like, hey, as soon as I'm ready and I think I've got this job under wraps in 6 months and I'm killing it. No, that's the point of, that's when the employer has made their investment and they need you to do it for another year or two to get a return on the energy to invest in you, not 6 months, I've got this job next.
Right. What's next?
What's next? What do you want me, what can I do? So just a little mind shift, I think, for them.
All right, we'll take a break. There's a number if you want to call in, 615-737-PLUS, 615-737-7587. Take a break, be back right after this.